Our next presenter is Professor Leslie Delserone from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and she is going to present on agricultural data ownership, privacy, confidentiality, a librarian's perspective. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm going to start my timer on this end. Try to keep it on time, Erin, and I'll share my slides in just a minute. Well, I'm really grateful to see all of you, even if it's two-dimensionally. And I'm grateful for today's opportunity to hear about and discuss a range of opinions, concerns, and possible solutions to our current concerns about ownership, privacy, and confidentiality of agricultural data. And I'll start my PowerPoint. Hopefully you can see the PowerPoint. Yes? Aaron?
Yes,
okay.
We can see it.
So I'll share a librarian's perspective on this topic with you, in part because the domains of agriculture and library and information sciences are dealing with many of the same issues around data and are in similar states of questioning and flux. My hope is that a cross-discipline collective conversation will benefit us all. For background, I'm a former plant pathologist, now an agricultural sciences librarian with data services responsibilities, initially with the University of Minnesota Twin Cities Libraries, and for the last 10 years at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I have no legal background, and so I will be sharing views that are based in the practice and shared understanding of the ethics of librarianship. So this is going to be a very different talk. Librarians have been active in research data concerns since the early 2000s. The U.S. Agricultural Information Network, USAIN, is one of several professional library and information science groups following and trying to influence ag data issues, particularly in academic and government research venues. Other organizations within my academic sphere include the International Research Data Alliance, RDA, the Research Data Access and Preservation Association, known as RDAP, and then working groups within the Association of College and Research Libraries, the Association of Research Libraries, and the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. For the next few minutes, we'll look at the similarities and differences in understanding and practice around ownership, privacy, and something that I haven't heard a lot about, confidentiality, in the ag data and library spaces. Touch briefly on the notion of agricultural data as a common good for the common good, and the role of libraries in delivering on that. And close with a look at 3 efforts that model collaboration around data between business, government, and academic interests. Libraries collect a lot of data. Most of it is tied to our users and their behaviors while using our spaces, content and collections, and equipment such as computers. It's safe to say that libraries don't own user data in the legal sense defined here. We certainly don't sell it. What we retain may be explored to inform services or collection decisions. There are data we don't mine at all. This second quote describes concerns applicable to ownership of ag data. And the point of public interest is an important one as we grapple with food security, climate change, land management, and other concerns. If ag data are locked up entirely by any party, we potentially lose capacity to solve problems. However, librarians would probably argue that farmers own their data and that third parties collecting producers' data do not, at least not without the explicit agreement of and payment to the grower. And yet, like the ag data community, libraries have a lot to figure out about the ownership issue. because of the profession's commitment to privacy and confidentiality, but complicated by our need to work with third parties. The library is concerned with the privacy of a library user. With this definition, the American Library Association grounds user privacy in intellectual freedom and the pursuit of learning. Library users have an expectation of privacy in pursuing information and for their information seeking and use to be confidential. In libraries, this means that we do not divulge users' reading histories, for example, or information on the searches they conduct in our databases or on our computers. In addition, we value de-identifying data from the people who generate that data in their use of our systems. In applying these practices to the ag data space, I personally would like to support a producer's right to the privacy of any data generated on property they own or with any equipment they own. But this comes more from an awareness of my own data details, data traces, data trails. The picture is never simple though. For libraries, user data may be collected by third-party vendors that provide access to licensed or purchased e-content, or by software on computers available to users in the library. Similarly, third parties collect data about producers and their property, agronomic characteristics, management practices, selection of seed, etc. For both libraries and producers, these data collection practices are part of the agreements signed for the use of a desirable product. Both libraries and producers need to thoroughly understand the terms of data collection and use within a contract. And then the choices are: one, you try to renegotiate if the terms are unacceptable. Two, you swallow hard and accept the terms because of the necessity or desirability of acquiring the product. Or three, you choose to do without. This latter choice may have negative consequences for the library and its users. For example, in users not having access to a fuller range of content. And for the producers, being unable to plant the latest hybrid or use the latest model of a piece of equipment. I mentioned before, I haven't heard much explicit use of the term confidentiality. It seems to be included in the term and concept of privacy in the discussions I've heard thus far. We actually break this out very specifically in our profession. So libraries, as I've mentioned, collect personally identifiable information about users as they interact with our computers, our e-resources, and even our books. That PII can be protected, which is why we won't tell you who has the unavailable item you'd like to access, and why browser histories on library computers generally are wiped clean at the end of a business day. But libraries do collect PII and keep it longer than many users might realize, even if we don't do anything with it. And while we have an ideal of confidentiality, we should probably be tougher negotiators with the vendors we work with, some of whom require a user to create a login or to create a special account to access certain features in a product, thereby connecting an identity with an IP address. With producers' data, is there or can there be agreements made about the retention and deposition of a producer's PII? I'm particularly thinking about this in business agreements. Could a grower agree to provide data and allow for retention of PII, let's say for customized recommendations? Or could a farmer agree to provide data that will be stripped of identifying information and aggregated for analyses of soil conditions in a region, for example, or the performance of particular lines in a certain hardiness zone? Librarians and others often say that information wants to be free, and we'd extend that to data as well, when appropriate. Academic libraries in particular continue to educate about and promote an open science, open data platform. There are examples of aggregated agricultural data being used to increase crop yields, to farm more efficiently, and to potentially impact climate change. Dr. Ken Kassman, an agronomist at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, stated that, and I quote him, "We have been successful raising yields or reducing environmental footprint, but not both at the same time. And that is the greatest scientific challenge facing humankind. Big data will be essential to bring together all the information a farmer needs." He was referring to a goal of aggregated data, shared and not siloed, adequately described and cleaned for reuse, stored and curated. Librarians and other information and data scientists have and continue to work with growers, government and academic researchers, and businesses to describe data, make data fair enough for reuse by others, disseminate and provide access, curation, and archiving services. In this ongoing discussion about ag data, those of us who work with data and information on a daily basis are ready to apply our expertise. As we've heard, there are many examples of cooperation and collaboration around data aggregation, sharing, and use. I've selected just 3 to mention here. The first, while not explicitly ag data related, is relevant because of the associated interest in weather and climate. The American Meteorological Society, NOAA, and a number of academic and industry partners have entered into a 10-year agreement to serve up NOAA's massive data collections in the cloud for interested users. The primary focus here obviously isn't a grower, but one of the desired endpoints would be an understanding of climate and weather that would positively influence a producer's decisions. A more ag-focused partnership is GODAN, an international group working to make food and nutrition data more accessible and usable. This group is working with all parties on the agricultural production and distribution spectrum to collect, share, and reuse data to increase food security and impact climate change, particularly for smallholder farmers in developing nations. One of the challenges here is understanding of and negotiation of the concepts of data ownership, privacy, and confidentiality at an international level. A more US-based collaboration is the Ag Data Coalition, of which the University of Nebraska is a member. Glad to hear it mentioned earlier. For a bit more detail, the ADC is a producer-focused nonprofit corporation developed, and I'm quoting from their website, to create a place where ag data can be stored and shared, giving the farmer, their trusted service providers, and research institutions the freedom to work with whomever they choose, end quote. The ADC created a data repository for the management, storage, and sharing of data. Again, quoting from the ADC website, it represents the only independent place where equipment manufacturers, crop input producers, farm management information systems, or any other entity poised to work with farmer data can engineer their own internal and proprietary systems to connect. This represents a significant opportunity to the entire industry to simplify this whole data storage and transfer question, and to do so at a low cost point, end quote. And finally, ADC is very clear that it doesn't share, sell, or otherwise make available the data because it's not ADC's data. It belongs to someone else. I share these examples to bring them to your attention if you were unaware of them, and to suggest that GODAN and the ADC be part of these ongoing discussions if they are not already. So libraries are in a very unique place of arguing for individual privacy and confidentiality while advocating that as much as possible, data be open. To my library colleagues in attendance, as well as others, please weigh in with your thoughts. I do thank you very much for listening.
Wow, good timing.
Can you tell I teach? Yes.
Excellent. So David, do we have any questions?
Sorry, I muted myself. No questions posted.
How closely do you work with the ADC?
I don't work directly with the corporation, but I work with several people who serve on its board of directors.
And is how much investment has the Nebraska Lincoln put into that relationship?
I know they put people power into it. We have quite a few faculty serving, working with people in the group. I can't speak to any financial commitment. I'm not privy to that information. I think you know Jennifer Clark and Joe Luck. So if you want to follow up more with them, Jennifer would be a very good person to follow up with.
Sure.
Any of my library's colleagues want to pitch in with any comments? Or maybe they can't unmute themselves. I don't know.
You'd be able to unmute yourself. Would you like to pick on somebody and then I'll unmute them?
Oh,
for you?
no, I'm not gonna, I wouldn't do that. But, you know, if there aren't any questions, then this is an opportunity for you to make up for a little bit of time.
Yes, we get back. Looks like we get back 3 minutes. So.
Yeah.
Well, let me
good.
just, this is Cindy Parr, and sorry I was, my microphone wasn't working, so I wanted to just put a quick response in from the library perspective, but also from the Chief Data Officer perspective, because somebody put in the chat that in Canada, that Chief Data Officers are putting into place policies to optimize the use of all data and also to protect privacy and confidentiality. And I would say that there's actually a role for libraries, at least as consultants and support to help people manage and determine the fate of the data that they're collecting or that they're using. But in the US, we are building particular infrastructure, I guess I should say governance structures that are specific to data that are separate from the IT structures. So there's actually sort of 3 prongs here. There's the libraries, there's the data organizations, and then there's also the more system infrastructure that has to implement the work that is either recommended by libraries or enforced by policy and undergoing governance by the Chief Data Officer organizations. So I think everybody has a role, and in a university, that would also include the role of the research office, who's basically in the path between actually getting funding to the researchers to do the work. And so there's a lot of different players in this space.
Right. And there's also researcher compliance services would be involved in that.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Cindy.
David, are there some questions? I thought, looks like there's some questions in the chat.
Let's see. Well, a comment that overall today, many of the projects are quite large and would maybe be considered big data projects. But how do you think smaller projects would integrate with these larger efforts? Any thoughts there?
Well, I'm certainly not representing myself as any kind of a true expert in this area. I mean, interoperability, right, is always a problem. And so I bring up some of these smaller group efforts in the hopes that larger groups many of whom are represented here, who have more significant and established processes and infrastructure, might coordinate, communicate with the smaller groups, that maybe there could be some shared efforts that would allow more cross hybridization. It's really easy to get siloed. We talk about it all the time in the library world, but it sure happens in the data world too. And so, I don't want to take away from, large efforts like GEMS, which is fabulous, but I also don't want to forget about so-called smaller efforts like ADC or GODAN, who I think are taking some interesting approaches to working with agricultural data. And if they could kind of be part of the team, I think that would be a really healthy thing for everybody.
Interesting. For you, or maybe more generally to anybody, have any legal challenges been made to access private data?
Oh, yeah. Can you say Patriot Act? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I personally have never experienced any of those, but there is a legal mechanism for taking a library user's data, or getting a library user's data with a warrant. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Leslie.